back with the darkness cards. A lot of interesting things here, just like with most of the colors in the various sets. Uh, few. I guess the big things that this overall seems to support the archetypes of Rotworms and Shadow Champions are fine in Kaijudo, but they're a bit underwhelming. I mean, there's like exactly one good Shadow Champion support card. The other two are terrible, and Rotworms are just missing a little bit of compared to what you see in like the Chimera as like a mid-range archetype. And also, there's some cards that support like the self-destruction style of play. The DM stuff's a little bit heavier on that, I think, than Kaijudo was. So that'll be interesting to see if anything comes of that. And also self-mill, which is something that I have explored personally a lot in Kaijudo, and I think is really fun, but is ultimately just very few cards that actually do the job very efficiently. And so adding a few more to that pool might actually make strategies like that viable, especially with a card like Underworld Stalker that is a little more direct payoff to that style of play than what you might see with a lot of other strategies. Well, without any further ado, we'll get into it. First card is Amber Piercer. It's a 4 mana, 2000 power Brainjacker. Whenever this creature attacks, choose a creature in your discard pile and return it to your hand. Kaijudo has a card that does this already in Grave Scrounger. However, Grave Scrounger is capped and only lets you return a level 4 or lower creature back to your hand. This is not limited, so slightly higher utility. I still don't think this card is particularly strong enough to see any level of play, but again, yeah, we're bumping up the power level of a few not very highly used cards in Kaijudo, and I think that's just a good thing to do in general. Next card's a little more interesting. We have Bat Doctor, Shadow of Undeath. It's a 3 mana, 2000 power Spectre. When this creature is banished, return another creature from your discard pile to your hand. I don't know if this kind of card could see play. Like the cards that when they're banished they hand rip your opponent saw a little bit of play, and but like the ones that when they were banished you drew a card didn't really. And maybe partly that was because of the higher mana cost. But this is sort of like a targeted draw, especially if you are going like with a self mill style of play. I think this might be worth experimenting with. Like I don't think it would ever be a 3 of or anything, but um, I could definitely see this actually like being a functional card in some capacity. Just depends on whether those types of strategies with the self banish, self mill could work together and or could work at all. Next we have Cursed Pincher. It's a 4 mana, 2000 power Brainjacker. It's got Blocker, Guard, and Slayer. So sort of similar to, oh, and now the name escapes me. It's a light darkness 5 mana card that has Blocker, Skirmisher, and Slayer. This is sort of a similar concept, but obviously slightly lower utility because it doesn't have the Skirmisher keyword. Um, it's kind of it is a frustrating set of abilities to have as a defensive card. It's probably still not too vulnerable to removal and stuff to really see significant play, but I don't know. It's a cool card design to exist, so I'm happy to have it in the set for sure. Next, we have the first of many of our Shadow Champions, um, Daedalus, General of Fury, 4 mana, 11,000. Shadow Champion. It's got Double Breaker, and while you have no other creatures, this creature can't attack. And whenever this creature attacks, banish one of your other creatures. So yeah, pretty large downside to offset the very high power level for a level 4 creature. Um, Definitely with the site sort of cards, the Grudge Weavers and stuff, something like this maybe could see a niche. I mean, people definitely had to experiment a little bit with Nether Tactician in kind of a similar role. Um, this has obviously got a lot more like destructive potential, even with those, obviously also a lot of potential to be just bad too in different contexts. I'm not sure if this design will work ultimately, just because 4 mana creatures just have that same shared weakness to Bone Blades in Kaijudo. So I think trying to, well, this card might otherwise be very strong to deal with in a strategy built around it. Um, I think it might just be a little too easy to out, at least in against in some matchups anyway. But yeah, no, it's a cool design, and I definitely I could be way wrong. Maybe there's ways to use this and really break it. I mean, sheesh, Darkness does have tons of 1 drops, if nothing else, and there are well, coming up ways to kind of benefit more off of the creatures getting destroyed. Next, this is either a later Duel Masters card or it's a DMP exclusive card. We have Death Mori, Gate Watcher of Hell. You can kind of tell that that card wasn't localized to English, as I kind of doubt they would have kept that name, but that's neither here nor there. 4 mana, 4,000 power, Shadow Champion. When this creature enters the battle zone, you may banish one of your creatures. If you do, your opponent chooses one of his or her creatures in the battle zone. Banish that creature. Yeah, the pretty. It's basically Ripper Reaper, which is obviously kind of a fringe playable card on its own right. This is like stronger though. Obviously, it's 1 mana cheaper, which is huge, but it also can destroy itself, which is something Ripper Reaper can't do. So, I mean, worst case scenario in an open board state, you can just trade your 4 mana creature off for whatever your opponent's got out. So, if they got a bigger thing than you, and that's their only creature, well, then, hey, you just trade it up. Um, yeah, I don't know. Again, it kind of depends on how whether those self-destructive mono dark style decks are able to make some of these new toys fit with the existing Kaijudo ones and come up with a functional deck. Also worth mentioning, there is a promo version of it as well. I've had to include both artworks. I love the full art stuff. I really wish Kaijudo would have done just a little bit more of that. They kind of introduced it right at the end of the run, right when there wasn't much left of the game, but they do look really cool. Like to see it for sure. But yeah, and also worth mentioning, this is a Shadow Champion. There's just a lot of good stuff there in that archetype, and again, we'll see as we go along some more um, reasons to build around that strategy. Next, we have a fun card that I'm kind of excited about, even though I don't know if it's actually good, but I definitely would like to play with it. Enriching Worm. I believe this is a Duel Masters Plays exclusive. It's a 3 mana, 2,000 power Rotworm. It's got blocker and guard. And at the start of each of your turns, put the top 2 cards of your deck into your discard pile. Yeah, kind of a actually reasonable self-mill card. It's obviously a bit underpowered for the stat line for what it costs, but um, yeah, being able to have like this and like say Vicious Coffer to have a consistent turn 3, I'm gonna mill some cards thing, and put and develop a body on the board too, and be a vaguely useful type as well. That seems really cool. The whole like trigger every turn type thing. There aren't very many of those cards in Kaijudo, and honestly, a lot of them aren't very good. They kind of overbalanced for the power of that sort of effect. And this is probably a little bit tuned the same way, honestly. But again, I'm excited to see it. I definitely like the idea of decking myself to accomplish my goals. Um, Next, we have Gregoria, Princess of War, 6 mana, 5,000 power, Dark Lord, and its effect is all your Shadow Champions get plus 2,000 power and have blocker. So another Shadow Champion support card. Well, actually, a Shadow Champion support card. I don't. The other two technically were just champions themselves. Um, this is probably just a little bit too high cost for what it does. But again, I'm kind of glad it exists. I like cards like this that buff different tribes for various means. I mean, this maybe does have a little bit more potential than it otherwise would, just because of Underworld Stalker being a thing. Being able to give that blocker and have it be recurring every turn to protect you or whatever, and trade is kind of a fun interaction. Besides the other possibilities, so yeah, I don't know. I don't think this is quite strong enough, but maybe. Next we have Gregorian Worm. 4 mana, 3,000 power Rotworm, and it just has the text Shield Blast. So again, kind of following the similar pattern of just reasonably strong Shield Blast creatures that we've seen so far. The Rotworm text is sort of nice. Again, this kind of is a little bit more the pushed archetype than Chimera in these Duel Masters and stuff. I don't know if this would see play more than Dingorger, but I guess it's cool to have the option to run either one or both. Next we have probably the strongest just Rotworm card to add to the pool in Horrid Worm. It's a 3 mana, 2,000 power Rotworm. Whenever this creature attacks, your opponent discards a card at random. So yeah, it's they kind of upgrade the Giga Stand thing for the Rotworms, and the random discard is there's several cards with random discards in here. We'll get to them as we get to them. But I think that has some potential to be a pretty strong effect. Like the chosen discard thing, like your opponent's always going to pick the card that is the least useful. And obviously, if you play something like Mesmerizer, you're going to pick the card that's like the most useful to get rid of for them. This is obviously could be anything. So you have the potential to you're on average going to get a much stronger card than if they got to choose. I kind of like that about it, and being able to disrupt your opponent's plans and everything. Um, yeah, just like the idea of having some efficient discard options. And the Horrid Worm definitely fits into that. And again, it was Rotworm's a solid 3-drop, which they kind of nearly didn't have one. Even the Enriching Worm is probably not that good in a more dedicated Rotworm build. This is a good card. Next we have Locomotiver. It's a 4 mana, 1,000 power Tarborg. It has Shield Blast, and when this creature enters the battle zone, your opponent discards a card at random. Yeah, so it's largely a better Fumes. Obviously, a little bit lower power, but the Shield Blast effect and the random discard element of it, I think would more or less cause Fumes to no longer see play. This definitely feels like a very strong card. In the limited playtesting I've done with like Duel Masters cards in Kaijudo, this always felt pretty good. It works well with a lot of the self discards or the self banish stuff, because you get the value out of it when you just play it. So if you hit it off a Shield Blast or whatever, then you can pop it later and not feel bad about it. But yeah, just a very good card. Good, efficient card advantage wise and everything, and yeah, definitely would see play, I imagine. Next, this one was one of my last editions. Honestly, there was I was deciding between a lot of different mediocre cards to fill out the last slot, and this one is probably the one that would actually make the most impact. There's a lot of Darkness 1-drops in Kaijudo, and we're adding 2 more to that. They all have limitations and downsides, and this one is basically the same as the Kaijudo Marrow Ooze. It's Marrow Ooze the Twistered. It is 1 mana, 1,000 power zombie. Same stats as Kaijudo's Marrow Ooze. And it also has Blocker. However, the second effect is just subtly different, and it is an upgrade, so that's why I included it. When this creature attacks your opponent, banish it at the end of the attack. Noteworthy, not when this creature attacks. That's what our Marrow Ooze has. So this is a minor upgrade. You can, eat an opponent's Magris or something and not and retain your creature, which is kind of cool. There's also an alt art, so that's also kind of cool. Yeah, my only concern with doing something like this is just that there might be too many 1-drops. But honestly, this is the worst of the 1-drops that is potentially problematic that we're introducing. There's some scary stuff over in Fire and in Nature, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But still, Darkness Rush fans rejoice to have another good 1-drop to play with. And we have another good payoff for the self-banishing cards. We've got Mongrel Man, 5 mana, 2,000 power Tarborg. Whenever another creature is banished, if you have 5 or less cards in hand, draw a card. Yeah, so this is like the Duel Masters version of Black Feather, uh, but it is much stronger because it affects its weather effect. Has to do with your own cards, not just your opponent's creatures getting banished. So it really plays nicely with a lot of the self banish effects, stuff like building up a big wall of blockers and letting them chop block and that sort of thing. Um, I think the Duel Masters Plays adds the little 5 card or less limitation to prevent the draw from going really out of control. But adding this to a deck that also lends like Serpens, Gregoria, cards like or Gregoria's Fortress, cards like that really all synergize with the when your stuff gets blowed up sort of thing. Definitely some fun things there. The new Death Mori, Johnny Darkseid. Yeah, lots of fun interactions there, and definitely good. I like the idea of pushing that sort of gameplay for sure. Um, yeah, just a cool card to have in the pool. I don't. It's definitely not as like strong as like Mystery-S, um, or some of the water draw options, but Darkness doesn't have very many good draw options. I mean, you can really count them on one hand, and most of them are bad. Having a even decent one is cool. Next, we have Olgate Nightmare Samurai, 7 mana, 6,000 power, Shadow Champion. Um, it's got blocker, it's got double breaker, and whenever one of your creatures is banished, untap this creature. Um, Olgate does exist in Kaijudo. It's the 6 mana 5,000 and does not have blocker or double breaker. I think both of those keywords on top of that do make this card a little bit more interesting. As because it just isn't just a big dude that you could maybe set up a combo with, but actually impacts the board and affects your opponent's decision making, and they have to get around it instead of just being able to ignore it and kill you. Um, is it still good enough to um, you know be an inclusion? I don't know. I think it'd have to be of a pretty dedicated list, and it's probably not good enough, honestly. But it's a fun card. I would like to maybe it could have been niche into some of these self-destructive sort of decks. Next we have Propeller a Mutant. 4 mana. I'm sorry, 2 mana. Wow. 1,000 power. Tarborg. When this creature is banished, your opponent discards a card at random. So yeah, this is basically just an upgrade over Megaria's Trap Heap, and probably upgrade over Grudge Weaver too. Although Grudge Weaver's utility as a blocker is its own separate thing. But yeah, getting your opponent to discard a card at random, good effect. Synergizes with a lot of the self-banishment stuff, and maybe is useful even on its own merits as a kind of aggressive darkness card that your opponent's going to be hesitant to try to clear when you're attacking with it. Good card. Definitely would see play in something, I imagine. Next we have Scalpel Spider. 3 mana, 2,000 power, Brainjacker. And it has whenever this creature is attacked, it gets Slayer until the end of the turn. There's one card that has this effect. It's a Darkness Fire card. Thought it might be interesting to see a mono Darkness card have it too. It's probably not a card that would see a whole lot of serious play, honestly, but it's kind of one of those. It's a cool effect. It's nice to have in the pool. Next, we have Shadow Moon Cursed Shade, 4 mana, 3,000 power Spectre. Each of your other darkness creatures get plus 2,000 power. So having the kind of aura boost that boosts all your other creatures is cool. I feel like this is the cards that do this that people play are pretty much lower than 4 mana, ultimately, unfortunately. But I don't know. It would make something like the Marrow Ooze a little bit more interesting because it would be able to then trade with bigger creatures, and you'd be able to retain it. So I kind of like the idea of that, of having a reasonable power boost at 4 mana. I don't know. It's probably honestly usable, but I just don't know if it would actually see play or not. But yeah, power boost is real for sure. We have Sinister General Demudo, 6 mana, 5,000 power Dark Lord. When this creature is banished, banish all creatures that have power 3,000 or less. This is reciprocal, hits your own stuff too. Um, but kind of an interesting effect. There are a couple of like board wipey cards that are when they trigger when you enter the battle zone. Not so much one that triggers when your creature's banished. I don't know if it might be too slow to actually see play as a 6 mana creature, but it's it's interesting. I like kind of like having stuff like this in the pool to give somebody a chance to fool around with something, even if it's not maybe strictly speaking good. This definitely feels like it's something that could be fooled around with and maybe even have some reasonable success with. Next we have Stinger Worm, 3 mana, 5,000 power Rotworm. When this creature enters the battle zone, banish one of your creatures. So yeah, it's the overpowered creature that has the big drawback sort of shtick that Darkness likes to do. This is a interesting um, downside, just the idea that you have to trade off one of your weaker creatures. Definitely an interesting one with like having some of these other self banishment type effects going on. The shield regen one with Serpent, or Mongremand to draw, or whatever else you have going on, or just something that's recursive like Underworld Stalker that you can get back. But kind of a neat idea, kind of an efficient creature for what doing that, and leaving behind the reasonably strong body. I don't know, kind of an interesting card to maybe play around with anyway. And again, the Rotworm thing's kind of nice since the set pushes that a little bit. Though I don't know, I don't think the Rotworm stuff in general synergizes too well with the self banishment stuff. Um, Next we have Swamp Worm, 6 mana, 2,000 power, Rotworm as well. When this creature enters the battle zone, your opponent chooses one of his or her creatures in the battle zone, banish that creature. So it's kind of like a non-targeting Razor Kender, um, and a little bit cheaper, which is kind of where the allure lies. I don't know if this is quite strong enough in the modern game to really see play. Being 6 mana, under 6 mana, does have a little bit of synergy with some things, stuff like Oathsworn Call and the like. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's probably just not good enough, especially with, like competing with something like Vang or whatever in Darkness specifically. It's like, why would you run this over or that over this? Uh, I have a hard time seeing it, but again, it's a Rotworm. It does improve a little bit in an interesting way an existing Kaijudo card, so I like it. Next, we have that other one drop. It's a Tyrant Worm, 1 mana, 2,000 power. It is a Rotworm again. Whenever one of your other creatures enters the battle zone, banish this creature. Kind of an interesting niche that I guess this could fill as like specifically an Evo bait for Darkness and Rotworms. I'm not sure if it's good enough at that role to really see play because there are a lot of other one drops, and like the fact that it's 2,000 power isn't really that exciting. But I don't know, maybe just because the banish effect triggers anyway, like whenever you play something, it kind of frees you of having to play something to banish the card. So maybe some of these um, banishing synergy cards would actually like having something like this that's just really cheap and just is pretty much guaranteed to go off without having to set up a combo. So again, kind of just cool to have stuff that does this sort of thing, even if it's maybe not strictly speaking good. Vashuna Sword Dancer, 5 mana, 7,000 power, Shadow Champion. Double Breaker. While your opponent has no shields, this creature can't attack. This card, man, in early Kaijudo would have been really good, I think. As is, it's probably just a bit too slow, because it's just a guy who kills stuff, but doesn't really do anything else at 5 mana, which is just kind of a hard pill to swallow. Like the downside is relatively minor, all things considered. Especially depending on what kind of style of play you have, you can almost always just not break your opponent's last shield until you have game set up. But yeah, it's just probably just a bit too slow to actually really be viable. But it's a cool card. I do like it a lot. Just probably just a little bit underwhelming. Next we have Vile Molder, Wing of the Void, another Shadow Champion, 4 mana, 7,000 power. It has Double Breaker, it has this creature can't attack creatures, and it has when this creature wins a battle, banish it. So kind of similar to the Chimera Tyrant. It has a little more power, but it has another negative effect on it. This sort of card, I don't know. Chimera Tyrant, I think, might have seen a little bit play in aggro decks. I'm not sure if this would see more than that. Just yeah, it's a big guy as a 4-drop, but you could play an Evo or something too, or something like the 8-drop that is a 4-drop while you have enough creatures in the discard pile, sort of thing. That's a 6K. Like that sort of card with the self-mill stuff kind of would fill a similar role and have less downsides. So, or different downsides, I guess. So I think, I don't know, I'm not sure if this is quite good enough, but again, kind of another Shadow Champion, kind of a little bit of a different niche. Like to see it. The last Shadow Champion, we have Zorbaz the Bone Crusher, 5 mana, 8,000 power. It has blocker, guard, and when this creature wins a battle, banish it. So kind of the crunchy effect on a 5-drop bait, or 5-drop blocker. And a big guy too. This is much bigger than the existing Kaijudo 5-drop. Isn't it 6,000 power? No, Rupture Spider is 6,000. I'm not sure if there is one that's 5 mana. This card probably isn't good, but again, it kind of fills a bit of a unique niche there, so I decided to add it. In retro, yeah. Anyway, yeah, just kind of having more fun Shadow Champions, and the reason maybe I should like lead with the evolutions on these instead of leading with the creatures, because the evolutions are kind of like showing why I want to push or why the archetypes matter a little bit, as opposed to just having the cards out there. But this is the point of there's two of them here that for both Shadow Champions and for Rotworms that really make those archetypes like compelling. For the Shadow Champions, we've got Balam, a Master of Death, 8 mana evolution creature, 12,000 power. It is a Shadow Champion. It evolves onto a Shadow Champion, and so that's where the Shadow Champion tag becomes important. It's a triple breaker, and when this creature enters the battle zone, banish all non-darkness creatures. Kind of a crazy board wipe type effect. It is very slow, aiming in at turn 8. But Boulder Fist is slow as well, and also coming in at turn 8. And nature has some acceleration to usually you can play it a little earlier and stuff. But this is a big one. I feel like there is some potential here for sure, because Duel Masters didn't have the pool of like having the Underworld Stalker. Essentially, you can always have a bait for this. You don't have to. You don't have to necessarily maintain that dude on the board when your opponent knows the Balam's coming up. You can just keep returning it and keep having that threat there. Also sick alt art. Yeah, I feel like this card and Underworld Stalker make a compelling core of a deck. I don't know if it's competitively viable or not, but I would definitely like to experiment with this, as well as some of the other various Shadow Champions. I don't think you could just get away with just running Stalker. But yeah, there's the board wipe is crazy, and obviously Kaijudo's got a higher density of like multi-civs and stuff, so there are deck building ways around it from the other side of the table, certainly. But yeah, that's a big effect of just having a potentially a complete board wipe against potentially anything outside of darkness creatures. Being able to clear havens or infernuses or andromedas or whatever is wild for sure. Um, yeah, fun card. Definitely like to see this played with. Next we have the Rotworm evolution that's actually pretty good. 5 mana, 5,000 Chaos Worm. It's an evolution that goes on a Rotworm, and it's got the Hydra Medusa effect. When this creature enters the battle zone, banish target enemy creature. It is Hydra Medusa, but for Rotworms. So yeah, that combine this with adding Horrid Worm to the pool, having the existing Rotworms, the stuff like the couple of decent 2-drops, the couple of decent multi-civs, the 4-mana Double Breaker, Ancient Grave Worm, Ancient some kind of worm. That's pretty decent. I don't know. Maybe is there a reasonably compelling Rotworm deck to work with? Maybe. I don't know if it's still on the level of the Chimeras, but it's at least an interesting conversation to have. Next, we have the other Shadow Champion Evo, Lockdeus, Master of Death. It is a Shadow Champion evolution creature, 5 mana, 6,000 power. It does evolve onto a Shadow Champion again. It has Double Breaker, and when this creature enters the battle zone, target enemy creature gets minus 6,000 power until the end of the turn. So yeah, minus 6k. I'm not sure if this weren't on the Shadow Champion, if it were just on Darkness in general or on a different archetype, I would definitely think this is good. I'm not entirely sure. Forcing yourself to play it on a Shadow Champion. I mean, the Underworld Stalker thing kind of complicates the whole calculus, because Underworld Stalker is just a good card and you always have access to it. But yeah, maybe this is reasonable. I don't know if you'd play it in the same deck as Balam, or if maybe they'd be a slightly different mid-range versus control sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's an interesting card, and just having some more solid evolutions in there to fill different niches. Definitely cool. Definitely makes Shadow Champions a lot more alluring as an archetype. Next we have Ultracide Worm. This is again one of the last cards I added. It's not super high on my personal rating, but Ultracide Worm, 6 mana, 11,000. It is a Rotworm evolution creature. It evolves onto a Rotworm, and it has Double Breaker, and that's all it's got. It's just a big guy with lots of stats. Obviously, there are a few other Evos that are sort of in this niche of just kind of mid-range and big, and basically none of those see play. I don't really see how this one would be different, but again, kind of cool to have some more interesting options. I mean, Rotworms right now don't have a big finisher type, and this probably isn't it either, but that's cool to have. Let's get on to the spells. There's some fun stuff in here. We have Chains of Sacrifice, 8 mana spell. Banish up to 2 target enemy creatures. Banish one of your creatures. So a double Terror Pit, but it has a downside of having to banish one of your creatures. Now, as I understand it, if you don't have any creatures, you don't have to banish anything. So there is that. Just a potentially a 2-for-1. And again, with all the self-banishment type stuff, maybe you actually want to banish one of your creatures while you're at it. But it's probably a little too expensive to actually see play. Especially when you could, say, spend 1 more mana and play Absolute Darkness, or just play Absolute Incineration for this 8 mana. Just hard to imagine too many scenarios with this is a whole lot better. But still kind of a cool, sympathetic card effect that I like. Creeping Plague, 1 mana spell. One of your creatures gets Slayer until the end of the turn. This isn't good, but I don't think Darkness has a 1 mana spell in Kaijudo, so now they do. Yay! We have Death Smoke, 4 mana. Banish target untapped enemy creature. Just a strict 1 mana power upgrade on the Kaijudo Death Smoke that is probably still not quite good enough to see play. I feel like that. Maybe though. Honestly, 1 mana is huge on a lot of things, and Death Smoke was a reasonable card for the first few sets of Kaijudo. It was reasonably highly played, so maybe there's room for a 4 mana Death Smoke. I don't know. I'm not sure. There's not really any specific advantages to being able to play a 4 mana spell. Like not really any like synergies per se, but if it was 3, that'd be a different story. But that would also be kind of bonkers. But yeah, just having a relatively efficient um, out to a big control boss or something is intriguing for sure. Next we have Ghost Touch, which has an alt art as well. It's a 2 mana spell, Shield Blast, and your opponent discards a card at random. Yeah, just the upgrade over Spectre Claw. Even uses obviously the same art. Um, I The other comparison has to be to Mesmerize, and again, kind of talked a little bit earlier about the random discard versus controlled discard versus um, opponent controlled discard, and this definitely is an interesting would be an interesting taste study to see which where whether this would pay off versus Mez. And the shield blasting is nice. I don't know if it's something where you would pay the extra for that, but it's an interesting consideration for sure. Next card I'm kind of excited about, Primal Scream. Talking about self mill, 4 mana spell, Shield Blast. Put the top 4 cards of your deck into your discard pile, then return a creature from your discard pile to your hand. Yeah, so it's kind of just Gloom Tomb, but it has Shield Blast, which is nice, and it mills more. It mills 4. Um, I don't know. I want this card to be good, but I don't know if it actually is good. But I'm definitely gonna probably play with it at some point, at the very least, in like my goofy self mill corrupted deck, because kind of hankering for self mill playables. Um, yeah, fun card for sure, and you know, again, pushing the self mill is cool. Um, we've got Proclamation of Death, 4 mana spell, Shield Blast. Your opponent chooses one of his or her creatures in the battle zone, banish that creature. It's kind of a Grievous Strike. It does have the downside. Grievous Strike does specifically mention untapped creatures, which makes it a little bit more useful as like as a shield blast itself, as keeping yourself alive and that sort of thing. This has the upside though, of course, being a lot cheaper and much easier to hard cast. Um, the untargetable thing is obviously pretty relevant in the world where Haven exists. But yeah, I don't know. Darkness just gets some very nice, efficient removal options in this block, and obviously already has some good ones. I would be interesting to see what actually like rises to the top. Um, and the last card is Terra Pit, Duel Masters version of it, which is the same card as Kaijudo Terra Pit, but it costs 6 instead of 7. Yeah, nice upgrade. I feel like Terra Pit was kind of a card that like you still kind of wanted to run in a lot of decks that had darkness, but you ended up oftentimes cutting or trimming because you just wanted to have your curve more than you wanted to have blasts. And yeah, maybe this pushes it back a little bit towards the direction of wanting to run your 3 pits. Um, Also, 2 nice alt arts, including a full art, which I just love. I just love it. Yeah, run this alongside the Kaijudo Terra Pit with the full art, and then you just get your hands on everybody. I mean, what's not to love about that? Um, I probably should give more analysis to this, but I'm not sure if I have anything off the top of my head. Obviously, uh, a good card is good, and 1 mana less good card is even better. And that's it for Darkness. I We're on to Fire next, which has all kinds of its own fun issues to talk about. Pushing Rush, pushing Dragons, only some of the most annoying stuff in the game. It'll be a blast. Catch you next time.